Point series number 4. Today we're going to have a talk. We're having two talks about China. One's Julianne Garbarino's talk about mental health in China. And the other one is Tomas's talk about the World Expo and Hispanic and Latin-China relations. First off, we're going to have Julianne go.
I titled this talk from Trinity to China for a few reasons. First of all, the program started in Trinity, and that's where I started to develop my research question during the week when we were here doing orientation. And then secondly, my research on mental health and culture also started at Trinity with a Trinity professor, Janet Chang, in the psychology department. And I continued in China, and then also the paper that I wrote that I'm going to be talking about is cross-cultural. I'm talking about studies that were done in the US and then applying them to China because the topics that I'm looking at aren't studied as much in China as they are in the US, especially papers written in English. So first of all, I'm going to start off with this 20 statements test. So imagine you're given this test and you're asked to just finish this statement 20 times. If you are an American student, you're likely to say something like, I am a student, I am friendly, I am outgoing, I am shy. Define yourself in terms of personal characteristics. This test is also given to Japanese and Chinese students, and they're more likely to define themselves in terms of roles. Like my family has lived in this village, I am one of a long line of farmers. So that's one way of thinking about cultural psychology. And the way that the terms that are used are self-construal. So like an American student might have an independent self-construal. They define themselves as the same autonomous entity going into different situations, while if you have an interdependent self-construal, you define yourself more based on your role in the situation that you're in. It's also important to realize that this is generalizing, and so you have to apply this carefully. Okay. So you probably know, since you're here, that the rate of urbanization in China is unbelievable. I'm just going to read some statistics from the McKinsey Global Report preparing for China's billions. So 1 billion people will live in China's cities by 2030. 221 Chinese cities will have 1 million people by 2025. And Europe has 35 today. And then also 5 billion square meters of road will be paved by 2025. So we visited 4 cities that are urbanizing quickly: Chongqing, Wuhan, Nanjing, and Shanghai. So this is Chongqing, the downtown area, which is built up very quickly. And then this is the planning center. So we went to a planning center in every city, and they're informative and even sometimes propagandistic. They reinforce the thought that urbanization is a real phenomenon. It has to be planned for, and that cities want to promote themselves. So I'm going to leave behind urbanization for a second and move to cities and mental health. So if you've taken abnormal psych, you probably know that rates of mental illness are higher in cities. This could be due to immigration, discrimination, exposure to toxins. These factors increase risk of schizophrenia, but they also, there are higher levels of stress and crowding in cities, and these can all increase the likelihood that somebody will have less than ideal mental health. So when we were in Hartford, we learned about the Three Gorges Dam, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around the thought that 1.5 to 2 million people were displaced. I still can't really understand the impact of this. So it was a massive project completed in 2006 on the EC. And so on the China trip, we went on a river cruise, we went through the locks, and then we saw the dam. So people were forced to relocate. And then on the China trip, we also spoke with many professors at universities in the cities that we visited, and one of them presented to us 3 stages of adjustment that migrants to cities in China, or just migrants in general, have to go through. The first is just adjusting to local life. The cuisine could be very different. They have to adjust to a new type of work. And then finally there's the psychological adjustment, which is much more difficult to make. And it's also a lot easier for younger people to adapt. And then also there's the question of forced relocation versus voluntary migration. If somebody doesn't have the comfort of knowing that they can return home, then the adjustment can be much more difficult. So one of the reasons why this change can be difficult is loss of social capital. So social capital is made up of all these different factors, just networks that you have in your community, ties that you have, reciprocity, meaning that you feel that you can do things for other people and they'll do things for you, not explicitly stating that, but just this understanding and just trust in your community. And so during urbanization, social capital decreases for the individual. Urban social support generally comes from people who came from the same area as the migrant. There's increased reliance on family, which can cause more stress within the family. And so just imagine moving from, this is in a sort of rural water treatment plant that we saw outside of Chongqing. So imagine moving from this to this, or this is a different view of the same area where you can see sort of the greenery. So you imagine making that move yourself, and then imagine making that move if you have an interdependent self-construal. So if you were an urban migrant with an independent sense of self, meaning that you define yourself in terms of personal characteristics, how would the move affect you? And then if you had an interdependent sense of self and you define yourself based on relationships with other people in the role that you take on in various circumstances, how would the move have a different impact on you? And that's the question that I looked at in the paper. So this research on culture and mental health is done here at Trinity in the psychology department. For example, when working with Professor Chang, I became aware of the way that culture affects mental health, coping, and help seeking. So, for example, I became aware that if in a culture loss of face is more of a concern, there might be a greater likelihood that somebody will present, for example, depression with somatic symptoms. So going to the doctor and saying that they have a backache instead of saying they have like a depressed mood. And so how do we assess the impact of urban migration in China on well-being given this interdependent self-construal that we believe exists in China? Well, you need to have culturally relevant measures of happiness because the measures that we use in the US often base happiness and life satisfaction on self-esteem. That's a huge factor in the westernized measures, but can you apply those to China? And there's been work done by Ed Diener on this topic. He does a lot of cross-cultural psychology and looks at well-being. And in one of his books, there's this article that it like ranked